friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be creating this card for you today using some of my very most favorite products from Honeybee. The die set that I'm going to be using is the Lovely Layers Anemone. It is actually my very most favorite flower die from Honeybee and from the Lovely Layers series. This die set is actually so easy to die cut and to assemble. There's not very many pieces to it, and it just creates the most gorgeous, dimensional, beautiful embellishment for your projects. These are all of the pieces here that I've die cut from that die set, and at least for the florals, there's also the pieces for the foliage. And I wanted to die cut these today from colored cardstock and then just add a little bit of color to add some dimension and interest. So you'll just see me going in with some contrasting colors here that are really going to add some depth to these different die cut pieces. And you can use whatever inks you love to work with. Distress oxides would be perfect for this, distress inks, whatever you have, whatever is your favorite or you just love to use. And color cardstocks, I'm really crushing hard right now on the Spellbinders Colorwheel cardstock, but honestly, you can use any cardstock that you have in your space. So I'm just going in here onto this layer and adding just this really beautiful contrasting color. And the beautiful thing about these dies from Honeybee is that how they do this is you can see that on the die cuts there's some embossed lines, and those are the areas that are not going to be covered. And so it's easy to kind of figure out where to put your ink and where to make your ink the most dramatic. Now you can see that I am using the ink somewhat on where there aren't any embossed lines, but that is because I want to just have sort of like a gradual transition into the area where the lines are. So I'm just testing this out, putting this onto the layer just to make sure that I can see my inks underneath this upper layer. And I'm just going to finish that one up. And once I'm happy with that, I will go on to the one on the right and finish it up. And then I'll go on to the next layers. So I cut two sets of each one of the anemone pieces because I want to have two blooms on my project. This is the little bud. So with this die set, you can also create a little bud that has a stem and some leaves as well, which I think is so cute. And it just creates the most adorable little bud for your florals. I wanted to add some depth to my greens, my greenery as well. So you can just see I've got a lighter color of green die cut from the cardstock, and then I'm adding the depth and dimension with that darker ink. And the same for the stem for the little bud. I'm going to just create that little bit of extra depth, adding on that darker green ink. For the darker cardstock, dark green cardstock, I added some black to the center, and now I'm going in with some Lisa Horton interference ink. You can see that the interference ink on lighter cardstock is going to be one color, and on darker cardstock it's going to be another color. So on the darker cardstock, this color I'm using actually looks gold. And so that's the really cool thing about the interference ink is you get kind of two looks with one ink pad. So I'm going to finish adding that gold onto this green cardstock that has that little bit of black in the center. Now I'm going to show you how to assemble one of these blooms. Obviously, they're both going to go together exactly the same. So I'll just show you the one. I'm going to add some thin foam squares between the layers, and that's going to just create a little more depth and dimension. And I'm only putting the foam in the center of the bloom, and so that in that way I can bend up the edges and create some really nice fluff to my petals. So here you can just see I'm folding up the petals a little bit and just creating that really nice dimensional look with my floral. It makes it look a lot more realistic in that way. And so this is just another technique to create a little bit more texture with your florals. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add these center pieces together. You can see how easily these layer. The edges, the lines, the openings, all of the things help you to line these up. And of course, Honeybee does provide guides for layering all of these different products in the Lovely Layers category. So I did add a little bit of thin foam adhesive to the back of the very top of the center piece there. And so that last piece on the top has some foam, and that's just going to be so great and so dimensional. And then I'm just going to use my Honeybee liquid adhesive to add these layers of the bud together. And just using my tweezers to help me go ahead and guide this into the right spot. And then I'll add, again, some thin foam adhesive to the back of the bud to add it onto that base piece. So you cut the base piece from green so that the stem is green, and obviously the leaves are going to be green in that way then. And there isn't a topper piece to layer over top of the leaves. I cut it from the darker cardstock, and I just glued it in the center so that I can bend the ends of the leaves up on that top layer. I also cut the base layer from that darker green cardstock as well, just because I thought that would make it a little bit more substantial, but also in case any of it shows, I just thought that would make it look really cool. So that's the finished bud. These are the 2 finished blooms and the 2 finished buds that are ready to add on to my project. Now, unfortunately, this next little segment, I realized after I forgot to turn my camera on, but I took a piece of A2 size white cardstock and I just did some simple ink blending to create my card front. And I am going to show you here the colors that I used for this ink blending. Just a really, really basic blend starting from the darkest tone to the lightest. So I started off with the redwood, then I used a little bit of the grapevine, I used a little bit of the sun-kissed, and then I used some of the red jasper kind of in that middle area as a buffer between the darker reds and the yellow. And I really like how that turned out. I think it's really pretty. And this is going to be a really nice base for my florals and my greenery. So next I wanted to just kind of get an idea of where I wanted to place these pieces. So I'm just going to loosely lay them in here onto my card front and get an idea of placement before I start gluing things down. So I knew that I wanted to put the florals kind of diagonally on the project, and then I wanted to leave a spot in the lower right portion for my sentiment. So I'm just going to kind of see where I want these greenery pieces and the buds, and just to make sure I have room for that sentiment at the bottom. And at this point I hadn't chosen a sentiment set. I knew that that was kind of the area where I wanted to put that. So I really want this to be nice and full. I want it to be the florals and the greenery to be nice and full and lush looking. And now this is the sentiment set. This is You've Got a Friend. This was released earlier this year. It is absolutely wonderful. I love this set so much and I highly recommend it. I chose sentiment here for this area. I'm going to just add some anti-static powder down there because I do want to do a little bit of heat embossing. So I'm going to stamp this out with some slow drying pigment ink to begin with. And I'm going to stamp that a couple of times. And then I'm just going to add some clear embossing powder over top of that. I'll just tap off the excess powder and then I'll hit that with my heat tool and melt that embossing powder. And that's just going to give a really nice, crisp, glossy looking sentiment on the bottom of our project. I'll take my Honeybee Be Creative adhesive, liquid adhesive, add that to the back of my card panel and just adhere that down onto a top folding white card base or card for our project. And then I'll just start to glue these different bits down. So I'm going to just go ahead and glue that bloom down by adding a little bit of adhesive in the center. And in that way, I'll still be able to tuck the greenery and the buds in between. And so I'll just go ahead and add the liquid adhesive to the middle of the other bloom. And I'll just give that a few seconds here to dry before I get the greenery added in there. So you can see the basic idea of where I wanted to put the greenery and the bud. I'm going to just add a little bit of foam adhesive in behind there. And that's just going to bump that up a little bit more, make it a little more dimensional. And then I'll do the same thing with the other greenery. Here you can just see I'm showing you how I glued the stems together. I just offset them slightly so that you can see that darker green and then the lighter green on top. And then I'll just lay the bud on top of that, and I'll add some foam adhesive onto the back of the bud and then onto the back of the greenery and adhere it onto the project. So I'll just put a little bit of that foam adhesive on there, and then directly behind where the bud is, behind the greenery there, I'll add the other foam adhesive, and then I'll just tuck that in, and that's going to stay put. So I really love how this turned out. I wanted to add just a little bit more sparkle to this project, so I decided to just take some gold watercolor paint. You can use any gold watercolor paint. It doesn't have to be the product I'm using here, anything that you have. You could also use white on here. White splatter would be really pretty as well, but I decided to just use gold. It's a little bit more subtle than white, but it still adds that little bit of shimmer and shine. I did cover up the sentiment for this part of the process because I didn't want to mar the words in any way in the sentiment. So I'm just going to cover that up and get that done, and this finishes my project. Friends, I have linked up in the description box below to the products that I've used today for my project. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you were inspired to get out your lovely layers florals and make some pretty cards. Take care, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.